Hello, welcome to the Coachlogik podcast. I'm your host, Max Aita. I'm joined by my co-host, cohort, Joshua. I was going to say something really offensive there, but Joshua Gibson. Josh, how are you doing, man?
Yeah, well, now I realize that the way we normally interact is starting to bleed into the public persona as well. So we should probably be a little careful about that. Uh,
Yeah, a
I'm
lot of
doing
G
well.
words I could have used that were not very nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, what have you been up to since we last
Um,
spoke?
Coaching, like writing a lot of programs. So I think I mentioned that we got, I don't remember if we've done a podcast since, but we got the IRB pushed for the data I'm going to collect for my dissertation.
Nice.
Um, so we're going to start rolling that out and doing a lot of jump testing within the high school settings, and then passed an in program exam. You have to pass as a benchmark to stay in the program. So I'm kind of shackled to them now, figuratively. They removed the chain a long time ago. Kidding. And actually, training's been going super well. I
Oh yeah,
somehow
I didn't even
clean
ask about
jerked
that.
out. Yeah, training's been going really, really well. I doubled. I pressed one out because whatever, but I did no feet double in the snatch at 100, like super easy.
Nice.
And that was after missing 95 after like 5 triples. He said, work up. Missed 95,
Mm,
made it. And then I felt really good on another day. Took a double up to 100 and crushed it.
nice.
Um, Low block clean and jerked 130 actually pretty easily. My positions are so much better, like racking the bar, standing up in the correct position, that like the 130 is only limited by leg strength at this point. So I feel like as that starts to improve, my technique is like actually kind of staying step for step. So training's been going well. School's going relatively well. Coaching's going well. So
Nice.
that's about it.
That's
And
great.
I don't know. I guess this one's not going to release until we've recorded the research debrief. But within the
Mm,
mentorship group that we have now created basically like a research review. We're calling a research debrief, where we take recent articles, recently published articles, I'd say within the last like 5 years. And we are kind of examining them, breaking them down, and then helping create kind of actionable steps for all coaches to implement. That is live in in the mentorship group. So if you're interested at all in understanding kind of like the latest sports science, the latest research relating to weightlifting, powerlifting, strength performance, that's in the group. And there's a chat between ourselves and Chris Tabor, looking at what he kind of broke down for us and getting into it, kind of more into the practical application weeds, which is awesome. So I'd really check out the mentorship group, where we also break down case studies. The first one was looking at my program and my training, but people can submit their own case studies of themselves and of their athletes, and we can kind of like talk through exactly what they're doing, why they're doing it, and how they could do it better, and then how that's applicable for everyone else. So a lot of really good stuff going on in there. Content's always being dumped in. I put a research article up on the repeated bout effect that we talked about in the last chat, the last
nice.
call. So that's like a cool introduction to what is the repeated bout effect, what are the mechanisms and mediators. And there's some really interesting information that and this is kind of what you have to do with science, is you have to take a piece of information, kind of extrapolate it and think about it within different contexts. So this idea of, I can train a single limb that takes advantage of the repeated bout effect, right? You could become less sensitive to the damage that would be incurred by future sessions. There's actually a mechanism by which that protective effect happens with the other limb, even if it's
Mm-hmm.
not trained. So if I, do a bunch of curls with my right arm, never done curls before, I undergo the repeated bout effect, and then that also translates to the other arm having some sort of protective effect. It's not like crazy in magnitude, but when you start to think about that from like an injury standpoint,
Yeah.
single limb training can be effective to preserve gains, or at least keep them from degrading as much as they would. So there are a lot of cool things to kind of think about based on that. So for everyone listening, I'd go check out the mentorship group and kind of get in line, so to speak, for the coaching platform once it's kind of formalized and
Yeah.
released for public use.
Yeah. And then additionally, Masters Nationals was just this last weekend, which was pretty awesome. We had a ton of people on weightlifting AI that did super well. Some podium places, some personal records. So yeah, check out the weightlifting AI Instagram. Check out some of those stories. Pretty awesome. It's always cool to me when I see somebody on the platform make a PR, do something well, and then I see like the tag for weightlifting AI, and I'm just like, that's like a very sort of like warms my heart because it's like that's so cool to see that. It's like one thing if it's a program you wrote, but it's like I had nothing to do with that. I mean, like directly, like we obviously made the app, but like that's cool that like, oh shit, that worked and they did well there. So very cool. If you're interested in the coaching platform, obviously hit us up. Mentorship group, definitely get in there. You're probably in there if you're listening to this, or if you're not, then do it. So today,
Well,
I want to. Oh yeah.
and then it was your 40th birthday on the
Oh yeah.
23rd.
That's a 3/4 of the way through my life, so no big deal.
So 40th birthday. Everyone listening, go wish Max Aita a belated happy birthday. And that was also the same day as the Oakland Max Out, which was the first USAPL powerlifting meet hosted by Max's Gym. You had a ton of competitors. It was a great competition, and I'll say my little piece before you can explain, how it went for people interested. But Joanne Aita competed, and Ziba competed as well. And I've been programming for Ziba, loosely programming for Joanne, and they both went 8 for 9. And Ziba,
good meet.
Yeah, Ziba PR'd her dots because she moved down a weight class. I think she crushed her old dots, which is kind of like what I talked to her about when you're changing weight classes. Like, let's focus on how you are as a powerlifter, and not just on absolute numbers necessarily. So,
you know who killed it was Kevin.
I saw his deadlift.
Kevin Spencer. He cut so his best total ever was 2.5 kilos higher than this, but he was 31, 33 pounds heavier.
Wow.
And it was like 5 years ago or 3 years ago or something. So he's cut down to 148, and he did great. 200 kilo squat, 125 bench, 227 deadlift. And he also was like 90% in charge of like setting everything up, not everything, but like setting up the cameras and the computers and all this shit. Like, and he works as like a project manager at Pixar. So the dude has a stressful life going into it. Cut weight, did all that, had a great day.
Yeah.
He only did 4 for 4 in the squat and the bench, which was smart. Like his 200 was a 10. It was a 10 out of 10. It was a grind. So like no reason to waste another attempt, but that was cool. That was like super satisfying to see that. Everyone in our gym did well. They all lifted super well. Everyone had good days, had a lot of fun, a lot of new lifters for their first time ever doing a powerlifting meet, which was cool. So that was exciting. I'm really excited to get more into powerlifting again, got to get back into it and run USAPL meets at our gym, be more sort of invested in it again. I obviously coached in it, coached powerlifting for a long time, did a lot of it. We've put so much effort into the weightlifting stuff that the powerlifting has kind of become the secondary thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I still coach Andy Riley, who's, like a world medalist. But, it's like, there's just a lot of like, I haven't done that same like hardcore, being at every powerlifting meet kind of thing.
Well, and kind of what it feels like. And I actually had this experience at the Arnold. I was in the back with Danny, and she did super well, went 8 for 9. And I was talking to Jeremy Hartman. I don't know if you're familiar with Jeremy. He's a powerlifting coach. He competed at like a really high level, I think equipped and maybe raw, and he's coached for a really long time. I think it was actually the best. He was like the USAPL coach of the year or something. I don't know, something insane.
Oh, cool.
But I was in the back with him, and I was talking about coaching, and I'm like, I coach, mostly weightlifters and a few powerlifters. And I kind of made a comment about that. Like, I'd like to coach, more powerlifters. He's like, yeah, you're a great powerlifting coach. Like you should definitely be coaching more and be more in the coaching space. And it's like, that's a good point. You get so used to being a weightlifting coach who happens to also coach powerlifters that it's I feel like it just feels like such a removed part of your coaching that it's like, oh, I have a few powerlifters in the stable, but you don't feel like a powerlifting coach with a powerlifting team.
Yeah, that's a good question. And so this is actually kind of, I'll segue this into the topic I really want to talk about today. But That's a good point, because I remember when I started coaching powerlifting, which was essentially right around the time I started, as soon as I did a powerlifting meet, I started advertising coaching. Like, I'm a powerlifting coach. Sign up, sign up, sign up. No, it's the same as when the first time I did a snatch, I started selling coaching before I even did the clean and jerk. No, it was like, I remember like getting into powerlifting coaching was a thing that was always kind of like, yeah, it's like obvious, easy to coach powerlifting. It's like half of weightlifting, and there's no skill. There's no skill required or athleticism required. Um, and I remember coaching, like, one of the first really strong people I ever coached was Christy Hawkins. And she was obviously incredibly strong. She moved and went on to be like the strongest of women ever. Um, and I remember thinking like, oh, powerlifting is like this thing you kind of do on the sides, like whatever, it's kind of fun. But now it seems like it's diverged a lot. I don't think there's very many coaches who are doing both,
No.
at a high level. Like, I don't know if anyone else has even coached a world medalist in the IPF and an international medalist in weightlifting.
No. Nope.
Right. I have, but yeah, I don't. So that's like uncommon, and obviously it makes sense. You're going to just focus on the one thing, right? If you're going to do powerlifting, you just be in it deeply. I feel like people get so deep into each sport, they just pigeonhole it, and it's like, that's it. As coaches, that both you and I coach a lot of both weightlifting and powerlifting, I find it interesting because it always gives me this perspective on both sides. Like, what's super important, what's not important, how significant is this thing, how is that thing a big deal? And you can just kind of take a step back and have the perspective, like, missing a lift in weightlifting is just like nothing. It means nothing. You might miss a snatch. Big deal. Take a second, come back and readjust your technique and make it. Powerlifting, you miss a squat, you miss a deadlift, at any weight, something's fucked up, right? Like, holy shit, this is a bad day.
Yeah.
Like, we're off program. Maybe like a PR attempt or like a high RPE weight you might miss, and might not be a big deal, but like, yeah, it's like if I had a lifter missing as many lifts in weightlifting or in powerlifting as someone would in weightlifting in a week, that would be a really fucked up scenario. So I say all that kind of to preface where I'm curious, and I think I've seen an interesting sort of, I guess, evolution of things. And the question I want to pose, the topic of this podcast I want to pose is, to what degree of granularity are things important? Like, how important are the details, and to what degree do the details actually control our processes? So I'll sort of frame this scenario. I can think of a lot of different training systems that revolve around exactness. And the exactness would be something like prescriptions of total training volume. Let's go back to the juggernaut sort of era, MEV, MRV. Conceptually, they make a lot of sense. There's a minimum effective dose, there's a maximum recoverable dose. Now, in practice, it does appear that those boundaries, the distance between those points, is massive, or can be very massive. It could also be very close. And theoretical concepts make sense. How accurate would you have to be in that system to not have to really, quote unquote, optimize it? So example would be like, if you calculate your MEV based on a bunch of variables, which is what JTS did, and you say, okay, my MEV in the squat is 10 sets and my MRV is 20 sets. If you're off by 10%, one set either way, is that going to be better or worse, be a problem? If you're off by 20%, two sets, is that a big problem? If you're off by 5 sets, are you like totally fucked in the system fucked? Can you still make progress? Can you make the same amount of progress? So there's a system that's constructed around concepts, which I think is totally sound. The question one is, we don't necessarily know exactly how valid those constructs are in practice, but then the question becomes, when you build a system on theoretical ideas, what is the what is the degree of like variance within a single person's training that you can actually attribute to a specific outcome? Saying like, yeah, we miscalculated your MRV by a set. Oh man, you're fucked. Like your program's fucked. Like, and then the question becomes, how big is that buffer? I say this because I feel like I've seen more and more of a kind of divergence on both ends. One is to say nothing matters at all. Fuck it, just train. All the way to you've got to do exactly this, or I manipulated someone's program by a single set and moved a single set of accessory movements to a different day, and that's the thing that created that's the thing that made that performance.
Yeah, a lot of this is eating your own shit, basically. Like,
Yeah.
and thinking like, oh, this is the best tasting meal I've ever had, as you Jeff Cake into your hand. Part of that is because you aren't controlling for everything. So to say that like, oh, I did these things and this is the result, it's like, yeah, but there's so much you can't control for. You actually should, and this is the way I think about coaching. You don't know that you couldn't have, so you don't know that you actually couldn't have gotten a better result. Maybe you would have if you would have done something else differently. So like the way I approach coaching to maybe make this a little more transparent is, oh, you hit PRs. Could you have hit bigger PRs? So it's not like, oh, we did this magical thing, therefore we peaked you. It's like, could we have peaked you more? Did we get lucky? Is that like kind of actually us doing like a bad job? Is that us doing a great job? So where does this fall within your potential to perform? And I've never once had someone compete and think, well, this is really their top end. This is every single thing they could have done if we would have aligned the stars perfectly. To me, it's more so like, I probably fucked up along the way. I wish I would have done a better job. I'm glad you came out with a good performance. And maybe those are two different perspectives, right? But the reason I bring that up is because when you say that I made this adjustment, one, it's a best guess. It's an approximation. Two, my mind immediately goes to this example. Did you control for volume in the warm-ups? So did you account for, well, normally go in, you do the bar for this, 70 for this, 120, 150, 170, 180, and those are your work sets. We account for all of the work from start to finish, and we track that every workout, and we track all the changes, and we have some sort of like coefficient for variations, and we have like the detail of the system to say like, we changed this thing and we had this effect. It would have to be so immensely detailed. I don't know if anyone could actually do it. And then that's obviously saying we have to also concede we can't control for outside stressors. So you have to be very overly confident to say that like this adjustment was the adjustment. Maybe it's like a crude adjustment. It's a crude approximation of what works better. Like I do that, but I can't say that like we did this thing, therefore we have this effect. It's like we got closer to correct. We got closer to what's right. Or we caught you at a good time in your life where you're well-fed, well-rested, low stress, and you're handling training well. So I think when we talk about MAV, MRV, we're talking this very broad, we're more so looking at this like broad area where we can be effective and have effective training. And we just happen to be within it. But it's not like a singular dot. It's very much an enlarged kind of landing pad that we just have to get close to. We're on. And then we get PRs. Like, honestly, with Joanne, she squatted 137.5, which is like good for her. And that was like good for the meet. It was like 7.5 up from the last comp she did. I don't think I really did that. I think she just like has been training consistently or training harder and like did enough to get a better result. It's like what I see when she competed is like, I should have done something to get her deadlift up. So like, how do we actually modify that? So like what she does next time is a closer approximation of what she needs. But it's not like I can take credit for. There's some magical formula. So
yeah,
I would say like that over like opinionated perspective that like it was my system that did it. I don't think it is.
Yeah. So I agree totally, right? Like the fundamental question we're kind of posing here is, if you did 4x5 or 6x5, is
Yeah.
that better or worse than 5x5? Right? Like, does that single set have that significant of an impact? Now, in a single workout, we know that's just not the case, right? Now, on a day where you could have done 7x5 or 8x5 and you did 4x5, maybe you left some potential progress
Yeah.
on the table. Or on a day where you maybe only could have tolerated 3x5 and you did 6x5, like you might have pushed yourself too far, right? So, in the context of the overall picture, yeah, there's probably a reality that a small adjustment like that makes a difference.
Right.
The analogy I would use to describe how I conceptualize training and the process is, imagine you're a painter and you have a palette in front of you and you want to mix a particular color, a hue, right? And if you were to take the base color, let's say this is white, and you add a little bit of dark blue, you start mixing it and you're like, okay, that's closer to the blue color I want, but it's a little too blue. I'm going to add a little bit of like red to it and just a tiny bit of red. You're never actually saying like mix exactly this much red and exactly that much blue to get it. Sure, you can go to the reality is you could do that. You could measure it exactly. But what we're thinking of in the training process is the process of how to make progress, which is to overload and drive results up by forcing the organism to adapt to the stress in front of them. That may be more or less any given day. And so it's like this sort of mixing of colors, like, okay, we've got way too much red in there now. We've got to sort of balance it out. We're going to add more blue, right? Um, Not to say that your coaching should be a thing that is done every day on the fly, which is like, oh, do this, do that. But it's like, it's generalizations of let's add more volume. Let's reduce volume. Let's bring the intensity up. Let's reduce the intensity. They're not necessarily these hard and fast prescriptions to say that you have granular control over some of the adaptations someone makes based on the ability to add or remove a single set or to shift a single thing in one way or the other.
Yeah.
It
Well,
just,
I think
yeah, it's just not
yeah.
that granular.
Well, and to take your example a step further, I think what you can do is you can create a system by which you more likely get to the correct color. So it's like
Yes.
if you measure them, like you weigh them out and you measure them, you can say like generally it's this many grams of white, this many grams of blue, this many grams of red. And then here's where like reality kicks you in the teeth. Imagine now that where you get those colors from, the factory changes every single time. So it's like instead of having the exact same colors, it's like you have the factory's versions. And basically what that is that's like programming in a real life situation where you can't control for everything. It's like, okay, now we have slightly different variations that of red, we have slightly different variations of blue, and then we have white. And it's like we have the same system of finding it, but the colors are in like tangibly different. So we can't use the same amounts. So
Yeah.
every program's going to look slightly different. Like every mixing is going to look slightly different. But the system by which you measure, you can say like, well, at least we know that this time when we had the result, this is what we did. But like for that factory, right? The next competition prep is a different factory and a different factory. So everything's always changing. The only
Yeah.
thing that stays stable is like your approach and how you can quantify and track. And I would say like, yeah, weightlifting and powerlifting are inherently different in how you do that. At
Yeah.
least enough
Oh,
to where like you can't do the exact same things. And then I would even say this is a point I got from Greg Knuckles when he was talking about like study designs. As like to find a significant effect, generally you have to have two really like diametrically opposed protocols of like zero carb and high carb. And it's like, yeah, maybe we can tease out significance based on the two. And I think with training, I've kind of gotten to this space of like, my changes probably need to be a little bigger than like one rep or like one set because I don't know if that
yeah.
actually has a meaning. Like it ends up putting out a meaningful change. So I try to have like, instead of like a 5% difference, it's 10 or 15 or 15 or 20. And it's like, that may be too big, but at least I can know if there is a change based on manipulation to volume or something.
Yeah. I agree. I think I think it's an interesting sort of topic, and I think it's like, especially for newer coaches, it's so paralyzing to see hyper specific prescriptions and rigid conceptual model in some places. I also believe the opposite is just as bad, which is to say, it doesn't fucking matter, just train, right? Just train, man. Like, you just got to lift heavier weights or do whatever, because that's also too broad. What I think helps newer coaches that don't have a lot of experience to draw from for themselves personally, but also just having coached people, is to give people the understanding that, look, use data to drive decisions and track and collect data so you can make informed choices, but understand that, like, the granularity of it is not nearly as important as the processes you place in front of you, right? Which is to say, we adhere to the principles of training. We try to, optimize has become like this weird word, which is like people will, this is a side note here, but like, you see all these YouTube videos, right, where it's like they talk about the optimizers being bad, right? The science backed people, the evidence people, they're trying to optimize. You don't need to optimize. You just need to try to find a training system that works really well for you. And like, they miss the stupidity that, like, optimize is just a fancy way of saying try to make your program really good, right? Try to make your program better than it was before. But ultimately, understand that, like, we're process oriented. We are focused on principles. We're focused on using data to inform better choices or avoid poor choices. And if we do that consistently and repeatedly, we will end up with a good result. Are we going to be 100% sure that we did everything we could with an athlete? We never will. You'll never know that, because you'll never actually have actually gotten someone to a point where it's like, okay, I did everything I could. They're the best they could. Then they suddenly, like, let's open up the envelope here and see what I could have done. Oh shit, I was 20 kilos below that. Right. So it's like, you don't have that luxury. What we do know is to say, did you have, like, take an athlete and have a great career? Did that athlete have a great career? Did they win championships? Did they lift big weights? Did they exceed what your expectations of them were? Or did they meet those high expectations? Did they perform well? Did they stay injury free? Like, did they ultimately have a successful performance and career long term? If the answer to a lot of those questions is more likely yes on all those things, you did a good job as a coach. Um, you know, Winning is the thing, obviously, and lifting big weights is the thing, but we have to sort of remember that this like, there's so many variables in there that could have been a nightmare. You know, like, okay, yeah, your athlete, like, got the extra 2 kilos or 2.5 kilos on the platform, but they had 6 years of suffering hamstring tears and quad tears and shit that just they didn't need to do. But, like, we made the most progress possible because we pushed as hard as we could. So, yeah, I think the takeaways for a new coach in this sort of discussion here from myself, and I'd be curious to hear you, but, like, you know, be smart about training. You can be a bit nerdy. You can also be a bit of a sort of meathead. It's okay to be a little bit of both of those things, where you understand that, like, you've got to push people, you've got to do things in a simple way, but also use data and use information to inform good practices, and then apply principles as a foundation so that you know that what you're trying to achieve is grounded in the overall, obvious good choices, specificity, overload. These things are considered, and they're, exploited to some degree so we can get progress out of somebody, versus, just going in and thinking you've got to have the perfect program and you're adjusting this set and that set, and I moved it from 11 a.m. to 11:15 a.m. and that's going to be the thing that, and the other side, which is like, yeah, we just maxed out our snatch or our clean and jerk or our squat, 2 days before the meet. That's good enough. It's fine. We're getting stronger. The Bulgarians do it. Be in the middle. Use data, use information to drive decisions, and you'll be in a much better spot.
Yeah, I think that's a great sequence of take homes. I would say, to me too, like, the biggest thing kind of off the back end of this is, you know, um, always try to do a better job. You would
Yeah.
say always try to do like a less bad job, but always try to do a better job. I would say I generally over um, allocate like how someone's performance to them if it's good, and then I under allocate it to them if it's bad. It's like I accept responsibility for bad performances. They get the praise if they do really well, and a lot of that's because like it isn't all you. Someone has to carry out the program, someone has to execute the plan, someone has to do a good job on implementing it, someone has to be thoughtful and work hard. And it's like, okay, I had a better approximation of what gets us there. And when it doesn't, it's like, well, they still checked all the same boxes. So obviously the bad performance is on me. It's like the only difference was the program they did. It wasn't the performance. Yeah.
I have a very fitting comment that would round this out, because the man who said it, so just sort of an update here, I guess, but Jim Schmitz, who you just did a podcast with, he's having some health problems right now. He's in the hospital. So if anyone who knows Jim Schmitz, maybe send over some well wishes. But Jim used to say, when, in reference to the athletes, when they do well, it's all them. And when they do bad, it's all you.
Mm. Yeah.
So, yeah, fuck them.
That's good. No, that's perfect. That's fitting. And the last thing I would say is, and it's along that same vein, don't, and this is like where the idea of self-awareness as a coach comes in. It's like, don't be okay with doing a bad job. Because like, if you're like phoning in part, like I used to just kind of phone in like accessory work for some lifters. It's like, we always do like a leg curl and like a leg extension. It's like, okay, well, it's like, are you doing that because it's convenient, or are you doing that because it's effective? And it's like, don't do something because it's convenient. Do it because it's effective. Right. And like, honestly, what's kind of helped me like single in more on the accessory work is all the conversations around hypertrophy with like Jake Rimmer and with Josh Pelland and with, Eric Helms, like with all those guys that we've had recently in the Coachlogik mentorship group, as well as just kind of more generally, all the conversations we've had. So I've thought a lot more about accessory work and started using like RIR, say like, hey, let's be like 2 to 3 from failure.
Yeah.
Let's have a focus on, whatever exercises. And I've been kind of like, maybe they wouldn't approve of this necessarily, but like, we don't do a ton of accessory work. We do a few exercises and we do limited volumes, but I've been doubling down on like long ranges of motion, peak tension at the longest muscle lengths. That way, when we do a little less work, it's like maybe the most effective or closer to the most effective. So as a coach, it's this idea of like, have a system that you can iterate on every aspect of it, not just the parts that feel most contributory to performance.
Yeah, I would second that too. Like a lot of the accessory training I write and prescribe, weightlifting, it's always a bit less significant. Like you're not going to, from 20 plus years of experience, like you're not going to drive your results up by having bigger lats, but definitely having stronger lats is not a bad thing. Right. So the accessory volumes, the accessory training is always something that's like, it's not sufficient, but it's to some degree necessary in that, like, we want to protect joints by having balance, strength around those joints, but also, just being able to, if your lats are strong, you can manipulate the bar a little bit better in certain places. So same thing, like maybe those prescriptions would be written in a different way now, having spoken to Jake and then seeing some of the data-driven strength guys, like just that conceptual idea of like, okay, I don't deload the accessory volume as much as I used to. I don't think that's, because the hypertrophy type training just doesn't seem to really benefit much from that. And then, as well, like focusing more on pushing people much harder towards failure, getting closer proximity to failure with that stuff. Somebody going in and doing, 3 sets of 10 dumbbell rows, at like, with like 10 reps in the tank is just like pointless. So it's like, okay, pushing those people harder. I even saw Seb doing it in Bulgaria. He was doing dumbbell rows and he was like, oh, I use like whatever, 15 kilos. And I was like, you got to use like 45 kilos, Seb.
Yeah.
You got to pump those numbers up because that's just not doing anything. It's not hard enough. So like, just like you said, like drawing from that stuff and saying, okay, it's not about like, they said do 9 reps and, 2 RIR. Like, no, it's like, okay, the general idea here is you've got to push people closer to failure.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily need to have these rigid structures of like, up, then deload every 4 weeks, right? Like you can be a little more flexible in the sense that like push people closer to failure, choose rep ranges that are more suitable to that or more tolerable as well, right? We don't need to do, 3 rep max, skull crushers, right? But also we're not going to do 20 rep max skull crushers either. So, generally well accepted practices, I think, are what's key in a lot of this. The problem, the sum of all this argument too is that the problem is general practices, people try to hone in on them to make them more effective. And so in doing that, they have to create a system of obscuring obvious simple choices with highly prescriptive specific choices, right, so that the reader or the audience believes that that person is, possesses some special skill or special knowledge that you don't, right? And that's where I don't know if it's always intentional, right? But it's definitely the kind of thing that like is muddying the waters of learning and new coaches.
Well, there are no other groups, no other experimental groups. If you do a skull crusher and then you say this is the best tricep exercise, did you compare it to a slight variation of that? Did you compare it to a different implement? Did you compare it to a different position, overhead, lying, like cable, like? So, I mean, to say that it's purely marketing, and it has to be. I mean, just because there are no counterfactuals that exist that encompass the variety of training decisions that you could possibly make. So, I'd say, with something like that, it's like have a best approximation, stay close to prescriptions of, volume, proximity to failure, and exercise selection, and like what that exactly looks like is going to be a recipe, and it's a different recipe every time, and it doesn't need to be one, it doesn't need to be another, it just has to be closer and closer to what makes the best sense based on your experience and understanding of the literature.
Yeah, couldn't say it any better. Awesome. Yeah, that's good. That's it for me. Unless you have anything else to add, I think that was pretty good.
All good.
Cool. All right, check out the mentorship group, Coachlogik. We are cooking awesome last week. The talk was so cool. Just the whole, like intricacy of us just talking about the training program, how you're doing it, the case study aspect to it, I think is super awesome. I'm really excited to do more of those. I almost want to do one every week because it's just like, it's fun. It's fun. It's practical. You're actually talking about training. You're talking about sets and reps and what we're doing this day. Why do we choose that? I feel like I learned stuff too. I look at it and I'm like, maybe I didn't need to make that choice. So if you're interested as a new coach or as a fan of coaching, check out the mentorship group. And that's it from myself and Josh. We will see you guys in the next one.